Okay, let's see if Gail's here. Again, good afternoon. We're going to go ahead and get started. We're going to take as many questions as we can, but put them in the chat while while the meeting's occurring, and I'll monitor that. I'm Bob Rotunda, I'm the Executive Director. On behalf of Dr. Gail Reed Barnett, our Professional Development Chair, our Professional Development Chair, we want to welcome back Dr. Bob Bidding. Bob presented for us last year. And this year's topic, many slides. This year's topic is teen abuse and dating violence. Dr. Bob Bidding is Associate Dean of Alfred University for the Greater New York area graduate and post-baccalaureate certificate programs of Alfred University. He's a licensed mental health counselor and nationally certified domestic violence instructor through the Department of Homeland Security and federal law enforcement training. He directs and is the group co-facilitator for the Batterers Education Program for domestic violence offenders in Allegheny County, New York, through the District Attorney's Office. Over the past 16 years, he's helped over 2,500 New York City teachers, healthcare workers, and public employees obtain their master's degrees in school mental health counseling, public administration, and health care management through Alfred University's partnership with the Center on Integrated Training and Education in Brooklyn, New York. So welcome, Bob, and you have the floor. Got to unmute, sir.
Hey, good. All right. Well, I hope everyone's had a good day. And I hope the weather's as nice where you are as it is here in Alfred in upstate New York right now. It's like 80 degrees and sunny out. So I appreciate you sitting in front of a screen for another hour or so. I'm going to talk a little bit about intimate partner violence tonight, especially as it pertains to younger people, to teens and younger people. The presentation I made last year was more of a general look at intimate partner violence. And that's sort of an expression we're using now more than calling it domestic violence. You know, the idea is that domestic sounds a little too nice for something that's really not that nice. So more and more you'll see it referred to as intimate partner violence. If you have questions, during my presentation, I know Bob's going to be looking at the chat room, but you're also welcome to interrupt me if you'd like. If I say something or I go too fast, or you'd like me to, repeat something that I showed you. And, I look forward to your questions and comments. As Bob noted, I've worked with domestic violence offenders for about 15 years now. But I haven't worked specifically with teen victims. All right. So, I sort of want to make that clear right off the bat. I have a pretty good understanding of the dynamics at play, and I've done a lot of sort of research into how it affects various groups of people, teens being one of them. But, as teachers, you're the ones on the front lines working with these students. And so, any observations or things you want to say about the material I present, I really welcome those types of comments. So let me share my screen and bring this up. All right, so this is nominally our title for today, Dating Abuse and Teen Violence. And Bob reminded me that it's National Mental Health Awareness Month. Is that correct, Bob? I'm pretty much, that's what it's called, right? A lot of the material that I'm presenting today, comes from a variety of different sources, stuff I've found, stuff I've researched, but a lot of it comes from the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence. If you're not familiar with that organization, the NCADV, it's a great resource for materials, both for someone who's going to work with someone who might be experiencing intimate partner violence, but also, just good educational material that you can share with others. So, check it out. I've also pulled some information from the Department of Homeland Security, the federal law enforcement training centers, and all sorts of different places. I'd like to start out just with reminding you that I think one of the most important things you can do is have some good hotline numbers at your disposal. And there are a number of them. Now, I just put a few up here. I put a New York City hotline number up on top, and then the general New York State hotline. But there are national hotlines too that you can see. There's a National Center on Domestic and Sexual Violence, and there's actually a specific teen dating abuse helpline that you can see there. So, what I would urge you to do is really keep these numbers handy, put them into your cell phone, have them ready if you need them. Instead of fumbling around and having to go look for them, put them in your phone. Put them in your phone and add the local numbers wherever you happen to be across the state. I would encourage you to add any local agency numbers that help victims and families of domestic violence. And again, this information, you'll have this, or you have it already, the information on my PowerPoint. So let's just jump right in. And, I want to just spend a minute or two reminding everybody what the definition is of intimate partner abuse. And again, I put sort of dating in parentheses and in quotation marks, just to, again, remind you that I'm really going to try to focus on that type of dating violence, and especially as it affects teens. So it's a repetitive pattern of behavior. And remember that it's all about power and control. I'll come back to that over and over again. What might seem like one thing often is, again, the attempt by the controlling partner, to manipulate and control the other person. And in this case, talking about dating couples, it's the perpetration or the threat of an act of violence by one member of an unmarried couple on the other member. Now, if it affects both males, females, under other gender identifications, but sort of for the purpose of my presentation, you'll see a lot of references to the victim being female and the perpetrator being male. But I want to make that clear right up front that by no means is always the pattern. And we do know that males are also victims of dating violence, right? And again, behaviors that physically harm, arouse fear, prevent a partner from doing what they wish, or force them to behave in ways they don't want. And again, dating violence is controlling, abusive, and aggressive behavior in a romantic relationship. I put romantic in quotations because it's not really very romantic, is it? If I'm, being controlling and abusive toward you, it can happen in any relationship. And the classic areas we think about when we think about intimate partner violence is verbal, emotional, physical, sexual, or usually a combination. And usually the gateway to intimate partner violence is emotional violence, denigrating the other person, calling them names, putting them down, treating them less than. But oftentimes it's a combination of many of these different types. I always like to start with just some statistics, and again, caution you that, you can find statistics everywhere and facts and figures, but I think it sort of, these facts and figures sort of just point to the reality that it's a pretty serious issue, right? Teens in all types of ethnic groups, socioeconomic groups, and geographic regions are affected. Boys tend to be more likely to be pinched, slapped, scratched, or kicked by dating partners. Girls are more at risk for severe violence, sexual violence, and injuries requiring medical attention. Pregnant teens are at greater risk for physical assault by intimate partners. And girls experience more psychological abuse from dating partners than boys. Young women, ages 16 to 24 years old, experience the highest rate of relationship violence. Again, if you have any comments on any of these, feel free to jump in, or Bob, you can interrupt me if you see things in the chat room. A few more facts for you to consider. And, this is pretty amazing when you think about it. 21% of female high school students and 13.4% of male high school students report being physically or sexually abused by a dating partner. So that translates into a pretty big number, doesn't it? 1.5 million high school students in the United States are physically abused every year by their dating partners. So it's happening where you are. It's happening every day where you are. And interesting thing I found here, the idea that 35% of 10th graders had either been physically or verbally abused, and 31% were perpetrators of physical or verbal abuse. I mean, you know, 1 in 3, 1 in 4. And it translates into being coerced into sexual intercourse against the, non-consensually. And just one more page of facts. And I'll spend a little more time talking about this later, because I think it's really where a lot of the, unfortunately, a lot of the action is the idea of cyber dating abuse. And females were twice as likely to be victims as males. 57% of teens know someone who has been physically, sexually, or verbally abusive in a dating relationship. And I highlighted this one just because I think that this is one of the real challenges we face, that only a third of teenage dating abuse victims ever told anyone about it, which means there are a lot of young people suffering in silence around us and not talking about it, not telling anyone about it. And that, that's a very difficult thing to overcome. And, it can lead to even more bad things. 50% of youth reporting dating violence and rape also reported attempting suicide. This is compared to 12.5% of non-abused girls and 5.4% of non-abused boys. So it's a big problem.
Got a good question in the chat.
Sure.
It's from Giovanni. It says, is aggression in an intimate relationship considered physical abuse when the female asks to be slapped or punched?
Boy, that's a good question. Yes, I guess I would consider that abuse just because it's harmful, it hurts, and it can go too far. So I think that I think yes, it certainly is an unhealthy expectation in a relationship.
I brought up the question. I brought up the question because two of my students who are involved in a relationship have come forward to me. The male in particular concerned because every time him and his partner are having an intimate affair, she's always asking him to slap her or to hit her and whatnot. Mm-hmm. And when he doesn't do it, then she gets upset.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, if you think about the fact that, these types of behaviors occur on a continuum and they escalate, and, we know that that's true. My concern there would be, where does it stop? Where does it stop? And, it might not stop until somebody is seriously injured or worse. So, I think I would encourage them to examine that behavior and think about the possibility that someone could, really get hurt by that behavior.
I have recommended maybe seeking therapy.
Sure. Oh yeah, sure. Look, a lot of stuff that we'll talk about, if in fact, something serious is going on, might need some sort of a, therapeutic intervention. Absolutely. And, and again, it's important to know where those resources are, where you are, either in your school or in your community, because it's definitely not healthy. It's definitely not healthy. Any reaction to that? Oh, okay. All right. I'll continue. So just to remind you, and many of you probably already are aware of the power and control model, but I just wanted to touch on it briefly, that, abusive behaviors and tactics range on a continuum. We used to talk about intimate partner violence as sort of a cycle, where everything would be okay. Then there would be the buildup of tension. There would be a critical incident, and then there would be some sort of a honeymoon phase We really don't use the term honeymoon phase anymore, and I'll say more about that, but it's really more of manipulative kindness. In other words, power and control is still very much at play, but if the behavior has gone too far, there's going to be an attempt by the perpetrator to keep power and control by, temporarily at least, maybe being nicer to the victim. All right. So that idea of continuum, and it's not a one-time event. I already mentioned that there are multiple forms used, and, tactics are well thought out and victim specific. In other words, if you know a person and you know a person well, you know what's going to work and what's not going to work. And there isn't a specific type of victim. So that's that power and control wheel. And there's one specifically for teens that I'm going to show you in a minute, right? So, the power and control wheel sort of is a way to look at the types of behaviors that perpetrators use as they exercise coercive and dominant behavior over a victim. Things like minimizing, gaslighting, denying, and, shows you ways that perpetrators control victims and limit their ability to really leave a relationship that is abusive. This is what it looks like, the teen power and control wheel. Now, this is a handout that you have, and I took the liberty of blowing it up a little bit for you. All right. But just to take a quick look at this, these are the types of things that victims experience, right? Being isolated, being excluded, controlling what she does, who she sees, what she reads, keeping her away from her friends, her family, becoming angry with her, name calling, making her think she's crazy. That's that's the gaslighting part of it. Treating her like a servant, making all the decisions in the relationship, being the one to define the roles involved, that idea of male privilege, and, threatening to use peer pressure, spreading rumors, telling stories, malicious lies about the person in order to make her behave in the way that he wants her to behave. And again, this is the lower part of the wheel. And again, you have a copy of this, the idea of, sexual coercion, which I already mentioned, getting her pregnant on purpose, right? Relationship where there are children, and there are with teen relationships, threatening to take the children away, getting someone drunk or drugged to have sex, intimidation, if I'm in a relationship and it's been violent in the past, oftentimes it only takes a certain look from the intimidator, and I know exactly what that means if I don't behave in a certain way. All right. And that includes smashing things, destroying property. Pet abuse is one of the major markers for violent relationships. A person who hurts and abuses pets is oftentimes also an intimate partner, violence abuser. And the idea of minimizing and denying and blaming, right? It wasn't me, it was her. That's something I'll talk about in just a minute, but that idea, it wasn't that bad. I only pushed her, I didn't hit her. I didn't really hurt her. I didn't do it at all. She's making it up. Shifting responsibility for abusive behavior. This is something I see all the time when I work with the domestic violence offenders that I work with. She should be here, not me. She hurt me. I'm the one I'm the victim here. I'm the victim here. So just to remind you that these behaviors occur on a continuum and escalate over time, right? And I put in a couple examples here in terms of physical abuse, verbal, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, all right? One of the defining characteristics of an abusive relationship is that the abusive behaviors escalate. They don't get better, they get worse. So no matter what the victim tries to do, and she or he may try many things in terms of modifying their own behavior, they really can't control the behavior of the other person. Again, we used to talk about a cycle and involving a honeymoon phase, but I really like to talk about, and my partner in my domestic violence group, we use the term manipulative kindness. Power and control is still what's going on there, but it's power and control by, sort of that make up, kiss and make nice phase, but really still to maintain power and control. And one of the terms I really have liked over the past couple of years is this idea of DARVO. And this is a technique you see a lot with offenders. You see it a lot on TV and in the news with people in the public eye. The ability of someone to deny that they behaved in a certain way and turn around and attack the victim and sort of reverse the role of the victim and offender. So that idea of DARVO: deny, attack, reverse the role of victim and offender. Any questions about DARVO? I think it's a pretty interesting dynamic that you can see in a lot of day-to-day behavior if you watch the news or if you look at relationships, unhealthy relationships. Has anyone ever run across DARVO before?
No responses yet.
Okay, that's all right. That's all right. Again, you come at me and I deny that I did it. I blame you instead of the blame being on me. I minimize what I did, and I put myself in the role of the victim, and you're the offender, not me. All right. And manipulators, offenders are very, very good at DARVO. Very, very good at it. So let's look at healthy and unhealthy relationships among teens. What's the difference? And how do you know? How do you know? And how do you help an at-risk teen to know? So that's sort of where I'm going to head next, now that we've sort of talked about some of the dynamics in the background. This is a relationship quiz that I have as a separate handout for you. But I really like this, and this is something that one of the useful, I hope, takeaways that you might use after this afternoon's presentation. But it just asks a series of key questions. Now it's cut off a little bit at the bottom, but I was able to save the phone number there. But how is your relationship, right? Does your partner do any of these things? Embarrass you with bad names, look at you in ways that scare you, control what you do, abuse you financially in terms of handling your money, making you give them all this money. Now, this obviously applies, we're talking about Social Security here, to people who are not teenagers, but these are all good questions that you can use to have a conversation with a teen, right? Act like abuse is no big deal. That's that idea of minimizing and DARVO. It's your fault, or either deny doing it. Destroy property, intimidate you with slaps, guns, knives, other weapons, force you to drop charges. We know many, many victims drop charges, repeatedly drop charges that are brought against an offender. And, threaten self-harm. If you don't do what I want, I'm going to commit suicide, or if you don't do what I want, I'm going to kill you, right? Here's what it says at the bottom. If you checked even one, you may be in an abusive relationship. If you need to talk, call us. So again, some good questions that, again, teens who are maybe new to relationships, trying to understand what's a healthy and unhealthy relationship, they may not, understand all of that. They may look, at least initially, at some of these controlling behaviors as, wow, he really loves me and he wants all my attention and he wants to spend all his time with me and only me. And that just shows that he loves me. All right. So I think it's good to have these conversations with young people because that's not healthy. It's not healthy. So again, right, all gender identities and all sexual orientations are affected. Usually boys perpetrate the most serious forms of dating abuse and sexual abuse, and usually girls are more frightened and traumatized. But again, the caveat, it happens to boys and all gender identities and sexual orientations also. All right. And again, that's important to remember. So just a quick reminder, what do we mean by physical abuse? Well, all these things. And remember, it's strangling, not choking, right? Choking is if you get something stuck in your throat. Strangling is the physical act of shutting off the airway, usually using your hands or some other rope or some other weapon like that, right? These are all examples of physical abuse. Financial abuse, touched on that just briefly, right? Again, controlling the money, either stealing it, making you give it to me. A common one, I think, is the idea of borrowing money and not returning it, making you feel guilty if you don't pay for things. And then, sort of, you owe me. I remember I bought you those flowers. You owe me. Again, sort of the gateway abusive behavior, the idea of emotional and psychological abuse. I always differentiate the idea of emotional abuse as really attacking a person's self-esteem. Psychological abuse is really using sort of threats of violence in some fashion, right? So I have them together here, but attacking your self-esteem, calling you ugly, fat, you look like a whore, what's wrong with you? Why do you dress that way? Threatening people, calling them names, shaming them, bullying them, and enjoying the idea that you're embarrassing them on purpose. And one of the most common ones, again, is that idea of isolation, isolating the victim. Sexual abuse, really quite simply is forcing someone to engage in any type of sexual act that they don't want to do. All right. That gets back to the question we had earlier, which I think is, an interesting one to keep considering. What happens if your partner wants you to hit her or, play really rough during sex? Well, I guess I would argue, going back to that a little bit, that's something that the other partner doesn't want to do. Well, then that sort of falls into the definition of sexual abuse, doesn't it? Right? If one partner doesn't want to do it, the other partner should respect that, right? Should respect that. But yeah, that was an interesting question. Thanks. And the others, right? Using drugs or alcohol to take advantage of you, touching you in unwanted ways. And if you say no, that idea of, what does that mean? Where's the line drawn? Is there a gray area? Is no? These are all continuing things that we think about when we're talking about these types of behaviors, and the idea of refusing to use any type of protection during sex. I thought I'd spend just a couple more slides on technological abuse, because I think it's a pretty interesting field. And again, one that I've been spending some time trying to understand. And, I'm an old dog. And as far as technology is concerned, my kids like to make fun of me, when I'm trying to use Facebook or Twitter and all those things. But really, this is where a lot of the action is in terms of dating abuse and dating abuse and violence is technological, right? He went through my Facebook friends and unfriended anybody who was a guy because he didn't want me talking to them, right? And, sort of a sarcastic joke off to the side. If you knew how many times I've checked your Facebook page, you'd probably file a restraining order. This is the one thing that our domestic violence offenders that I work with weekly over at the Allegheny County Jail, they're not actually inmates, so they come and go from the jail. This is the one thing that they're really good at, abusing technology to stay in control and do things like stalk and monitor a partner's behavior or an ex-partner's behavior. So, stalking is a very interesting topic. We could spend a lot of time talking about that, but the idea of monitoring your physical whereabouts through social media, cell phone, et cetera, little things, it creeps me out once in a while. I'll be somewhere and I'll get a call from my son and he'll say, "Hey, what are you doing at Walmart?" I'll say, how do you know I'm in Walmart? Well, he has an app on his phone that I must have enabled. He knows where I am, right? Well, that's okay because it's my son. But imagine if it's not okay with you, right? Knowing where you are all the time and hacking into your accounts to read your messages, threatening to spread personal information about you online, and constantly checking up on you through texts, emails, instant messenger, etc. And this is something I added recently in conversations with others. The idea of this is something you'll hear, and maybe you have heard about sextortion. It's a catchy way of talking about some of this technological abuse, but it refers to a form of blackmail in which sexual information or images are used to extort sexual favors from the victim. Social media, text messages are often the source of sexual material and the threatened means of sharing it with others. All right. And it, as you know, it starts simply enough. A friend request from somebody you might not know, and someone who begins to lie to you about who they are and what their motives are, and begin a relationship, and then all of a sudden it leads to, oh, would you send me a sexy picture of yourself? Well, once trust is established, here we go, right? And once those sexual photos or videos are out there, it is very difficult to get them back. And it can really accelerate into a really bad situation in a short period of time.
I've got a quick question for the
Yeah,
group.
absolutely.
Back to tech platforms. What are the tech platforms are the students using these days? I had a student, and the reason I ask is because somebody picked on me because I was guessing that they said only old people use Facebook, and I said, "Oh, sorry."
Well, I'm most familiar with Twitter. I know that that's what my kids use the most.
I think it's even past that now. I wonder what it is. TikTok, okay.
TikTok, yeah, TikTok. Yeah, sorry, TikTok is one.
Yeah.
Others?
Just curious. I know that they're constantly text messaging each other. I see my grandkids doing that. Snapchat. Ah, yeah.
Snapchat, yeah.
Instagram.
Mm-hmm.
I heard a college student said to me, "Oh, we don't use the gram anymore." I was like, "Oh, sorry."
Well, and that's the thing, and I'll unapologetically apologize because these things move fast. What you think is the technology of the moment moves very quickly.
Ann says there's a platform called Discord. I hadn't heard of that one. I'm writing it down. Okay.
What's it called? Discord?
Yeah. Cool. Good name.
Yeah, thank you. It's great to share information like this. So thank you for throwing that out there.
Okay.
Those of you who work with teens or have teens at home right now probably know better than I. Okay, thank you. So what? Some cautionary tales, right? I mean, and of course we know that these are hard to enforce, but the idea of not posting too much personal information, use all the privacy settings you can, use a nickname if you're on a dating site, don't accept unknown friend requests, the idea of don't click on links that you don't know who they're from or what they are, the idea of cover your webcam. I just watched a show on TV the other night, but the lady who founded Theranos. Anyway, one of the first things one of the new employees was told was cover your webcam so they can't watch what you're doing. And the idea of installing good antivirus software. Related to sextortion, and maybe it's just a slightly different shade of this whole idea of sextortion or using the internet for these types of things, is something that's called revenge porn. But really a better name for it would be non-consensual pornography. And why I say that is perpetrators are often not motivated by revenge. What do you think I mean by that? It's called revenge porn, but they're often not motivated by revenge. If not revenge, what is it they're motivated by? Any guesses? right
I
back
see
to the, right, go
I see
ahead.
some, no, I see some answers in the chat. Control,
Yep.
control, control. That
Yep.
came up like 3 times.
Yeah, that's it. Right back to the beginning, right? You know, we may call it revenge, but really what it is again, trying to maintain power and control. Yeah, thank you. Again, what is it? It's distributing sexually graphic images of individuals without their consent. And it includes, but not limited to, these types of things, right? Maybe I sent you a picture of myself in the beginning because I thought you and I had a private relationship. Well, not anymore, right? We break up. And now here it goes, right? And anything I do without your knowledge, hidden recordings, hacked images, etc. And there are laws on the book. I was going to put a map into the United States, but most states have laws now that, you know, come down quite hard on both sextortion and non-consensual pornography. So again, it would behoove you to, you know, to think about that and to look where you are in terms of some of the rules and regulations governing sextortion and revenge porn. So victims of revenge porn, 90% of revenge porn victims were women. 93% said they have suffered significant emotional distress due to being a victim. And 49% say they've been harassed or stalked online by users who saw their material, not the original perpetrator, but others. Now that the information is out there, it's out there. And there have been several famous cases of that information, you know, still being out there years later, and the damage it does to people and their careers and their lives. So again, some tips. Most of these are common sense, right? When you realize it's going on, you know, and again, this involves trust, of course. So sometimes it's not going to happen if you don't feel you're in a position to trust who's around you, but, you know, contact someone who might be responsible, local police. Stop communication immediately. Save screenshots if you can. And again, Facebook being one of many of the things that we're talking about, TikTok, Instagram, Snapchat, Discord, you know, stop it, right? Don't pay, right? If you're being blackmailed, don't pay. Even when the demands are met, usually, you know, they're still gonna, those pictures are still out there. Those pictures and videos are still out there. And do whatever you can to preserve evidence, And I think these are, you know, these are pretty obvious, aren't they? Right? You know, how does this affect your health? Well, you know, all sorts of things. Long-term depression and anxiety. You know, beyond the depression and anxiety a lot of us feel on a day-to-day basis. That's sort of a normal depression and anxiety we experience, right? It goes off the scale, requiring some sort of therapeutic intervention, right? Antisocial behavior, suicide, and, you know, long-term behavioral, cognitive, especially academic and social relationship problems. And it really is something that can have a negative effect on your health throughout your life. So what do healthy ones look like? And what do abusive ones look like? I think we've talked a little bit about that already. And what can you do if you find yourself in one? Remember now, we're again coming back to that, the umbrella of understanding that this is about power and control. Relationships, healthy relationships, are about equality, not control. You know, but they were so nice in the beginning. You know, sometimes teens who end up being abusive often start out by being very nice, attentive, charming, and romantic. But then the red flags begin to crop up over time. They begin to physically hurt or threaten. They try to control what you do, who you see, what you wear. Bullying behavior is often associated with intimate partner violence, the idea of just making you feel afraid and attacking your self-esteem. So this is my animated slide that I found, right? But that idea of, you know, these are some of the behaviors you look for. Someone who's overly jealous, focused on controlling everything you do and all your time. Oftentimes will refer to previous people that they've dated as crazy. There was something wrong with them. It wasn't me. That's why I'm with you now. And oftentimes spends most of their time with the victim and doesn't have a lot of other friends. So here's the teen equality wheel. What should a good relationship look like? And I blew this up a little bit for you too. The idea of, respect. What does it mean to be involved in a relationship where you're being listened to non-judgmentally, being affirmed in the emotional things that you're going through, understanding, valuing of opinions, sharing mutual responsibility for the things that happen in a relationship, trust and support, working through things in a non-threatening manner. And, when there are disagreements, negotiating, trying to be fair to one another, looking for the idea of being mutually satisfying, coming to mutually satisfying resolutions and accepting changes. What about the communication? Is it good communication, or is it all one way, right? Willingness to have an open and spontaneous dialogue about things, giving, receiving, compromise without overshadowing. And the idea of self-confidence and personal growth, encouraging the other person, celebrating their accomplishments and the good events that are happening in their lives, and accepting responsibility. People can learn, and one of the reasons we've been working with domestic violence offenders for the last 15 years is because we do believe at the end of the day, but not in all cases, I'm not an idealist, I'm pretty realistic, that people can learn to change their behavior and change the way they think about things. And, it's pretty much a straight up cognitive behavioral approach to what we do with our offenders, right? That given the opportunity and the willingness to work, that people can learn to behave differently. Now, does that happen in every case? Well, I wish it did, and I know that it doesn't, but it can happen in many cases, right? The idea of admitting being wrong and trying new ways to communicate. Many of the guys that I work with really haven't had an opportunity. They've never really seen healthy relationships. One of the things that we know about domestic violence is that it's generational. So imagine how difficult it is for a teenager, male or female, who's never seen a healthy relationship in their family. What do they know about honesty and accountability, right? So, that's where the intervention, one of the interventions can take place. How can you help them see what a healthy relationship is? One of the reasons we run our program in Allegheny County with a male, me, and a female corrections officer, my partner, Sarah, is that the two of us, not only are we running through a psychoeducational material with with our offenders, but we're also just modeling behavior, how we treat each other when we're in the room with these guys. All right. So that idea of modeling appropriate behavior, a lot of young people have not seen that, right? And they turn to other role models, yourselves included, to look for those markers. What does it mean? What does it mean to be in an equal relationship?
Had a couple good, Giovanni had a couple good comments in the chat. Giovanni,
Sure.
you could unmute Giovanni, just.
Go ahead.
Thank you. One
Sure.
of my questions was, how do you try to change the perspectives on dating when it interferes with one's religious beliefs? And I bring this up because one of my students, who happens to be Muslim, she tells me that, in her relationship, the man is always right, and she has to do whatever the man says. So, it's kind of difficult trying to change her views on dating and what is correct and what is not, or let's just say what is a healthy relationship compared to one that's not.
Yeah. Thank you. That's a very good point. And
how would you go? My question to you is, how would you go about that without violating that individual's religious beliefs? Or, as I said, sometimes there is a cultural factor in relationships.
Absolutely, there is. Okay. I guess my simple answer, and maybe it's not so simple, is nobody deserves to be hurt or abused in a relationship. No one deserves to be treated badly in a relationship or poorly in a relationship.
I have explained that to her. For example, she said that she didn't have any plans of going to college because she didn't have to, because the person who she was forced into marriage with had to provide everything for her.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So
Yeah,
again,
no, I mean,
with this being a cultural factor and sometimes extremely difficult to work with, and trying to get these individuals to see a different perspective, out of what they're brought up and shown from an early age till they reach adulthood or even adolescence.
I think, again, that it's difficult. I don't know if it's impossible, but again, I think consistent messaging to a person or persons about the fact that, again, I don't really, this is just me talking, right? It doesn't matter what religion you are or what your spiritual background is. Nobody deserves to be hurt. And, all you can do is reinforce that message. It's going to be up to the victim to decide whether or not he or she hears that message and, considers it in some way. But I understand that it's very difficult. Anyone else? I know we have a lot of people here. Anyone else run into this or want to comment on this? Because I think it's a very interesting, the cultural aspect, the religious aspect of this can be very, very interesting and challenging.
I usually see it as like a double standard, because what applies to the females does not apply to the males.
That's correct. That's correct. So, you're talking, that's a good point. You're talking to in this case, I don't know if you want to call it the victim, but let's say it's the female, right? And, sometimes when we focus, we're asking the wrong question, is what I would say. Sometimes we're saying in this case, and again, I'm generalizing, why doesn't she see what's going on here? Why doesn't she do something about it? Why doesn't she decide to, as difficult as it may or impossible as it may be, why doesn't she leave the relationship? That's really the wrong question, isn't it? Because when we do that, we're focusing on the victim and we're not paying attention to where it's coming from. In this case, from the male, right? So one of the questions is how can we, educate the perpetrator to see that this is a hurtful thing?
I think I've seen this also in my school where I work. I don't think that the people in that cultural setting see victim perpetrator. They just see it the way it is, just the way it is. Mm-hmm. And so my goal was to just make sure the kid was safe. Okay. Now, if the family decided that safe included getting married at 16 in another country, that was their call. We may disagree with that cultural aspect, but they didn't see that as an unsafe thing for that kid.
Right. So the idea of safe when he or she's with you or in your
in our setting, if they came in and reported that there was some violence or some harm or some other hurt that occurred, then that was the line. But if they were just reporting a cultural experience and a cultural modality, or whatever the word is, then that was just the way it was. And you're going to find that, depending on where you're working, you're going to find that in a lot of different settings. It's really it's really tough. I mean, I remember conversations with kids in my first job about abortion. Speaking of, again, 30 years ago, about we disagree with this and we agree with that and we disagree with this, and you have to kind of keep your opinion in your pocket and listen to the kids, and find out what their family background is and where they're coming from. And as long as they're safe, then whatever. Yeah.
Yes, I think that's a very good point, and thank you. The idea of being safe when they're with you. But you're right. If it crosses the line and you can tell that someone's been hurt physically, for example, then you have room to step in. But, I agree with that. And in the meantime, again, the subtle or not so subtle message, I think, still is that nobody deserves to be abused or hurt, right?
Can I interject for a second?
Yeah, sure.
There are times, for example, what is not safe for us, it's safe to them, and not only is it safe, but it's also acceptable. So it becomes sort of like very controversial then.
Hard. That's a good question.
Yeah. So where do you draw the line, right?
Right, without stampeding over, either cultural beliefs or religious beliefs, and not making the person seem that what they believe in is completely wrong, and they should go totally against what they've been brought up to believe.
Sure. So, Giovanni, I guess the other thing I would say, one of the other things we have and is how we are and how we act to other people when we're interacting with them, right? So in the classroom, if you're honest and accountable and promote some of these things having to do with equality, you're modeling behavior that you think is appropriate. And that's one way that either in the short term or long term, or maybe not much at all, but it's going to be hard to control sometimes other people's behavior, but you can control how you are when you're with others and what they see from you in terms of a significant role model. So I would, and if that at the end of the day is the best that you can do, being yourself and hoping that others see that and understand that that's your version of fairness and equality, you're doing as much as you can, maybe. Yeah. Yeah. Very good discussion. Other comments about that? Okay.
I guess as the other gentleman that was speaking right after I did, it all depends on where you work and what neighborhood you're serving and whatnot.
Right. Right. Well, and you have to feel comfortable or mostly comfortable in the environment that you're in, right? Or, there's going to be a real disconnect. There's going to be a real disconnect. All right. Thank you. Very, very interesting dive into the cultural aspects of that and the importance of safety and the difference between what's safe and what's acceptable. Very interesting. Thank you. Thank you. So again, this is sort of a summary of that wheel that I just showed you. Just some of the green flags, right? And again, these are different depending on, a lot of cultural differences here, right? And, these are things that we do as educators, I believe, supporting, we can do this too, right? Supporting personal growth, supporting open communication, supporting friendships, empathy, being empathetic ourselves, encouraging people to be self-reflective, have healthy hobbies, etc. Yeah, great. So here we go, right? What we were just talking about and what makes it easy and hard at the same time, right? Hopefully a healthy relationship should make you feel safe and respected and good about yourself and cared about and heard and listened to. I know there are cultural differences and those are very important, but these things are pretty universal, and you would hope that this is the way it should be. Again, that's a little bit idealistic, perhaps, right? And remember that teens are still learning about relationships. How are we doing here? Pretty good. Okay, good. I'm on good time here. If you haven't had a lot of dating experience, you might not recognize some of these unhealthy behaviors, right? The idea of jealousy. Well, he just loves me so much, he can't think of me interacting with anybody else. He's just being protective. He cares about me and wants the best for me. And the idea, he must love me. He can't stop thinking about me, following me around and texting me. All right. What's the difference between healthy and unhealthy? All right. Again, I think I already mentioned this. It came up a little bit earlier, the idea that, when we ask ourselves, why doesn't she get out of that relationship, for example, using the he, she combo there, remember that that's the wrong question, right? Instead of focusing on the behavior of the perpetrator, we're focusing on what's wrong with the victim for not leaving. That's a trap we easily fall into over and over again. All right. Remember, there are lots of reasons. There are lots of reasons. And one of the handouts I gave you, or you have, is 50 reasons why women stay in abusive relationships. Now, not all of these necessarily apply to teens, but many of them do. All right. Number 4 is a big one. Always believing that he'll change. If I just do something a little bit different next time, it'll be better. He'll change. All right. But there are a lot of invisible barriers that women face that make it very difficult to leave. And what we need to do is understand what those barriers are and see what we can do to minimize those barriers. Here's a list. There's 50 of them. I got the first 19 and the 27 through 42, but you have a handout for the full list, right? I see some cultural things in here. For example, clergy, the religious belief of some sort may make that very difficult, right? People don't believe her, handicap of some sort, all sorts of different reasons why it's hard for women to leave abusive partners. So before we ask why the victim isn't leaving, we need to look at what she's experiencing with the perpetrator. And remember the sort of the Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. I like this one. Remember that the abuser can be very nice, very likable, very charismatic, especially when others are around, right? I always forget who's the mean part, Dr. Jekyll or Mr. Hyde, but Dr. Jekyll's the nice person. But then, usually in private, he turns into Mr. Hyde, right? Mean, cruel, often in private. So the mistreated person feels that no one will believe her about the abuse. Plus, remember, right? There's a reason I decided to like you. I love you. I love the Dr. Jekyll part of you. I just can't get rid of Mr. Hyde. So there's a real, they're really torn between that nice part of the person and the not nice part of the person. And remember, sorry's not enough, right? That gets back to the idea of manipulative kindness. If you keep doing what you're telling me you're sorry about, that doesn't go anywhere. That idea, it's really more about manipulative kindness now. Just enough to keep control over you. All right. I want to talk a little bit as to end here about safety planning guides and ending a relationship safely, right? The longer you wait, the longer the abuse goes on, the more difficult it can be to get out. If you decide to end the relationship, it's good to have at your disposal a safety planning guide. And I'll show you an example of one in a minute. And you can find these different places. And I have, I think a third or fourth handout I gave you. You have a safety planning guide for teens. Always remembering that when the victim attempts to leave, that's the most dangerous time for obvious reasons. If I walk out the door, all of a sudden that power and control you had over me is gone, and I'm going to do anything I can to get it back. That's why it's the most dangerous time. It's important, very important, not to discuss with your partner, the abusive partner, your plans to leave. You risk physical injury or worse. What does a safety plan entail, right? Where can you go for help? Who can you call? Who can and will help you? How you escape if the situation becomes violent. What can you do to make yourself safer? This is the safety plan for teens that you have. I gave it to you as a handout because no matter how big I tried to make it, it was just a little small. And I hate people who say that it's a little small, but that's why I gave it to you as a handout. But, general safety, it's a contract. Oftentimes a simple contract can be important in helping a teen to consider what actions to take, right? So if we have an argument on a date and I feel unsafe, what will you do? Who could you call? What would you do if left in an isolated area? If you have an argument at school and I feel unsafe, what would you do? Who could help you? Where could you go to be safe, et cetera? The idea of safety again. What teacher and counselor do you trust? If you have an argument at a house and feel unsafe, where will you try to discuss it, right? Try to avoid arguments in the bathroom. Too many hard, sharp objects in a bathroom or in a kitchen or in a garage, right? A safe word, right? A code word with family and friends so they can call for help. And it goes on to talk about, other things, but most all of these have to do with, what can I do to feel safer if all of a sudden I find myself in an unsafe situation. Hard to do sometimes, right? But what exits are there in the house? Where are the phones that you can use to call the police? Do you have your cell phone? So the idea of having a safety plan can be, I think, a very important thing, even if you use it for discussion purposes with a teen or a student that's come to you for advice or for help.
I had a student once
Sure.
she had a safety plan with her family, and it didn't have any. It wasn't as a result of any kind of abuse. It was just a plan that she had with her family. And the deal was that if she texted them a certain word, they would call her and say, "Hey, we got to come and get you. Grandma's not feeling well."
Mm-hmm.
And it was her escape from whatever situation she was in, which anything from a bad date to a bad movie.
Sure.
And that was their plan. It was kind of a cool idea.
Yeah, that's great. So I mean, if you have a supportive and loving family, that's a great thing to talk about with your teenager, right? Yeah, so that's great. Thank you. So again, sort of, summarize this idea of safety plan, the idea of, try not to break daily routine. In other words, drawing undue attention to yourself. Again, thinking about safe locations in times of an emergency. This one, I put it in here, although I think you had to be pretty careful with the idea of a private journal, because if you have someone who's pretty controlling, they're going to be looking for that kind of thing all the time, I think, right? And the idea of having your cell phone at the ready, maybe some hidden cache ID keys. And again, there's that national teen dating abuse hotline specifically for younger people. So, if you think you're being abused, right? Don't stay silent. The idea of telling someone you trust, whoever that might be. Again, a lot of you on the call tonight fall into, this idea of you're mandated reporters, but you're also a safe zone, I'm sure, for many of the students with whom you interact. And, be careful about peer pressure and people who tend to judge you or don't believe you, because a lot of times people will dismiss, oh, Bill's a great guy. I can't believe he would say or do anything like that, right? So someone who defends your partner, who blames you, and of course, the person who will immediately go back to your partner and tell him or her what you're concerned about. Again, the idea that abuse is never your fault, and that many others have experienced the same thing as you. And even though, I think victims feel quite alone, one of the things that we can reinforce is that, they're not alone. And again, that can just be by our supportive actions, right? It's a choice, right? I can't change your behavior. You chose to be violent. And even though I think I might be able to control your behavior, that seldom is the case. And remember, it's a repeat thing. It's a pattern that they repeat. These guys that I work with have gone from one violent relationship to another, to another, to another. It's a pattern. It's an escalating pattern. Implications for school counselors is something I showed at the last when I did this last year, but ASCA has a lot of suggestions and ideas for helping, sort of with the education of what healthy relationships should be and could be. Large group prevention efforts targeting all children, getting to students, before it gets more serious, and, a direct intervention, if someone's been seriously impacted. That's what we were talking about a little bit earlier, about safe and acceptable, even though it might not match your cultural beliefs, safety first. But if it tips the scale into someone being physically hurt, for example, there needs to be some sort of intervention. So remember, first, right? Safety first, structure second, treatment third, support throughout. And, this is a sort of finish with this idea of, messages that you can give both in your behavior and in, you don't say all 6 of these things at once. And this doesn't apply just to teens, but these are sort of the messages that you can try to reinforce with victims. I'm afraid for your safety. If there are children involved, you're afraid for the safety of your children or others that are impacted by the relationship. Reminding victims that it's only going to get worse and that you're there for them. And that, again, nobody deserves to be abused. And it's not your fault. These are, sort of the messages you can reinforce. And again, it can be very frustrating when you want to help and the victim is unable or unwilling to accept the help. Remember that they have little or no control over their partner's behavior, maybe limited insight into and labeling the abuse. That's the way it is in my culture, right? Or in my family. Again, there's help available. And, I want to come back to just sort of reminding you, that there are hotlines, there are resources that you know about in the schools where you work or the communities in which you live. I'd encourage you to make sure you have all the updated information about those resources and, have them there and ready to share, at the right time. So, questions. Thank you. I appreciate your good questions during the presentation. Other things, Bob, that you see or anybody want to talk about?
Let's see. Ann's got a question. Ann, unmute and just ask.
Yes.
Hi,
So, hi, how are you?
Good.
I put a question in the chat. One of the frustrations that we had this year is we had a student who was in a very abusive relationship. It was sexually abusive. It was all the power and control. And the difficulty was the young lady did not want to press charges. And, when you take into account the dynamic of a victim, as well as the developmental stage of a teenager, you understand where they're coming from. And I was just wondering, do you know of any legal options that parents can press charges on behalf of their minor children? I know it's difficult, but it's one of those situations where, there's been 2 situations now, that have come to our attention, and it's just really frustrating because this person is out there not being held legally accountable and is going to continue to victimize other people.
Okay, so let me you're asking a question. Let me ask a question back at you.
Sure.
As a mandated reporter, has the behavior escalated to a point where you need to hotline that behavior? In other words, then bringing in someone like CPS or to come in and maybe establish some sort of a restraining order, things like that.
I was going right to, is the,
Yeah. It's a
No, I was
big-
just asking Ann about that. I mean,
Yeah,
did it escalate to the point where it needed to be hotline, or it could be hotlined as a mandated reporter?
No, we had the local police department involved, but again, it was a situation where they said if she was unwilling to press charges,
Mhm.
and the parents were feeling like pushing her to do it.
The parents were not pushing her to do it?
They were kind of on the fence. Again, there's cultural things.
Mhm.
There's a cultural factor. They're not native to our country.
Okay. Sure.
So there were some of those layers to it, but no, it wasn't a CPS issue, because the parents were made aware of the situation and they put restrictions on her access. It wasn't a lack of supervision issue on the part of the parents putting her in a safety.
Who called the police to begin with in this case?
When it came to our attention, we have a school resource officer in our district
Mhm.
and in our buildings. So when it came to our attention, the school resource officer was brought in and he took a statement, and the police department was involved. But they
So if
said
it's happened, and you're saying it's happened again, and again, not diving too deep into the particulars, but
sure.
were the police called in a second time or a third time?
This particular girl, and then we were made aware of another girl where there was a situation that occurred, but then again, charges were not pressed.
Mhm.
is it the same perpetrator?
Yeah.
Is he a student?
Yes.
See, that's easy. That's called CPS. That's a put the kid on a pins petition. Call CPS on him.
Well, we can't put CPS and PINS are two different things. So PINS is a person in need of supervision where
Right.
you apply through family court. That has nothing to do with child protection. Child protection is if the parent or caregiver of the child is in a position of not caring for the child.
Oh, I would make a case, and this was a strategy we used to use, was we'd call CPS and say, here's the situation. What should we do? We've got a perpetrator who's
Repeat offender too.
who's a repeat offender. What should we do? And let them answer the question.
Yeah,
because-
we have a CPS liaison in our school district.
Okay, good.
Yeah, we do. But it's one of those situations where I wasn't sure if we can legally advise parents that they can do something, without their daughter. But the police were saying even,
Yeah.
that was a slippery slope, because if you don't have a victim that's willing to give a statement and testify in court, then they're reluctant to pursue it.
So again, this is sort of a general comment. Again, what you're talking about there's a lot of focus here on the victim, but how can there be more pressure put on the perpetrator? Right? He's going from one person to another now, or maybe he's had more in the
Right.
past. I mean, how can you turn up the heat on the perpetrator? And again, that may be a combination of CPS, and maybe your resource officer, it may be continual visits by the policeman until he gets the message, or hopefully changes his behavior in some way. But it's a difficult question, but you can't hope that it goes away. I think you need to continue to, what are the responsibilities of the resource officer? Are there any other things that he or she has at their disposal to continue to bring pressure on this?
Yeah, I mean, it was turned over to our local police department, and the special victims unit did meet with the student and are investigating it. But again,
Wow.
they're, and the district has to be very careful, because if there's nothing that happened on, that there's the district has to be careful, because if there's nothing that there's no crime that we know of that's been committed on school grounds, it puts us in a precarious position as well.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you very much, though, for responding to that.
Oh, you're welcome. And I wish there were an easy answer, and that's unfortunately a lot of times it's not an easy answer.
Yeah.
But it seems like you're really you're doing what you can to keep the pressure on, and not let, not just say, not throw up your hands and say, oh, I guess we tried everything that we can do. I'm not going to try anymore, right? I
Yeah.
think
And when we continue to support the young lady who is out of the relationship,
Mhm.
you know, and provide her with as much support as we can.
Yeah,
Yeah.
great. That's great, Ann.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay.
We catch most of them in the chat room, Bob.
Yeah. I was scrolling and I don't see anything. Nope. I think we got everything.
I really appreciate all of you being here. I know some of you are signing off now, but your interest and concern about these types of things are very important. Again, you're on the front line with a lot of this, and so I appreciate your feedback and the things that that I don't. And I think the best thing we can do as concerned professionals is to share information about what's going on, and when situations have arisen, how did we handle it in our particular school or in wherever we are. And forums like this can be very valuable. And the examples that you brought up are very interesting and important. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Within the next 24 hours, I'll be sending out an email like we always do with a certificate of attendance, as well as links to the PowerPoint and the recording of this session, and the handouts that Bob provided for us. So on behalf of our PD committee, I'd like to thank you again for attending. We have some upcoming PD. There's next Wednesday, our final session in our series on principals and school counselors. That's next Wednesday. We have a careers in carpentry webinar next Thursday from the Carpenters Union. There's lots of jobs open, lots and lots of jobs open. Yeah, I wish I were 50 years younger. I'd do it. Our registration for our annual conference is open. Again, if you have any questions that we could pass on to Bob that we can answer, there will also be an evaluation in the email that I send to you for attending. So again, thanks and have a great evening.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. Thanks, Bob.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ann.